Welcome to the virtual towers of Binary Arcadia, where the games go on long into the night. So today's episode, BArcadians, is a kind of a focus chat around Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. We're going to talk through some details of the original game, something of a prelude to the next release, the Resident Evil 3 Remake, which we're actually expecting a demo from this week. We're filming just prior to the drop on Thursday. Is it the 19th of March, Rich?
It certainly is.
So yeah, hopefully this will serve as something of an assist if you've not played the original Resident Evil 3, and give you a little bit of background on some of the characters, the enemy types, the setting, where it sits in the franchise. And yeah, we're also going to finish off, thanks to Rich, with some tidbits that we know about Resident Evil 3, the remake, just to get us excited and revved up for some of the changes they've made to kind of reimagine the experience in this modern era. So, Richimus, where are we going to start with this one, sir?
So, I guess ultimately we'll start with a brief look at the story of the game. So, the original game came out in, I believe, September 1999. And I guess, would that have been on PlayStation tabs or PlayStation 2?
Yeah, it was the PlayStation.
Yeah.
They had a contract with Capcom to produce a certain amount of Resident Evil games. And as you know, we'll come on to, they ended up making what they consider the true sequel to Resident Evil 2 on the Dreamcast, as you well know, my friend.
Absolutely, yes. So, released in 1999 on the PlayStation. The story was set of a similar time of the events of Resident Evil 2 of September 1998, sort of, and we'll come on to that shortly. The first half of the game takes place literally before the events of Resident Evil 2. It's roughly about 24 hours, I think, in the timeline. But the second half of the game actually takes place after the game, which makes Resident Evil both a prequel and a sequel, which is really interesting. It sort of sets it apart from a lot of games. So what do we know about the story? Jill stays behind to find an underground Umbrella facility after the events of Resident Evil 1. I think 2 months roughly, Tabs, is that what we're saying on that, on the timeline?
Yeah, I think it's about 2 months after those events, and yeah, she's essentially trying to get to the bottom of, Umbrella's scheming, which is, what parks us as this kind of prequel sequel, as far as the timeline goes. And essentially Resident Evil 3 tracks Jill's journey as she attempts to escape from Raccoon City because, this investigation basically gets totally ruined by a T-virus outbreak. The entire city, the population of the city is pretty much infected with the T-virus at this point, and things are just going to shit. So, yeah, it starts off as an investigation, but ends as an escape and a bit of a rescue mission as well.
And then the ultimate goal of the game, as you say, is an escape, and the escape comes in the form of ringing the clock tower bell to call in a rescue helicopter that is provided by Umbrella, which is shared by the UBCS members Carlos, Mikhail, and Nikolai.
Yeah, so Carlos, Mikhail, and Nikolai, they're essentially mercs that I think have been hired by Umbrella, and they were sent in as like a countermeasure rescue operation for the biohazard that had been unleashed on Raccoon City. There's some twists and turns there between those characters and who are necessarily the good and the bad guys between them, but essentially they put you onto the fact that you can get the heck out of Dodge via this helicopter, but to call it in, you need to ring the clock tower bell.
And just to say, anyone that's watching, this is very broad brush story strokes. We didn't want to go too deep into the story, just in case anyone hasn't played the original of this game, and don't hence want to spoil too much for anyone planning to play the remake for the first time.
And also, BArcadians, please let us know if we're peddling any inaccuracies, because I have to admit, I've played and completed Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but I've not replayed it since. So this is all based on some research we've dived into over the past couple of days. If we've got anything wrong, just drop us a comment, put us right,
Yeah.
the other Barcadians know. So yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. So let's move on to characters. So the main character, well, there's two main characters, isn't there, Tabs? One, so there's Jill Valentine, basically, but there's also this Carlos. What's Carlos's second name, Tabs?
Oliveira. Or Oliveira.
Cool.
Yeah.
So there's two main characters, and they're the playable characters, basically. I think, do you get to decide which one you play as?
No, it's actually the first Resident Evil game where you don't make that choice at the start. Instead, you predominantly play as Jill, and you essentially get, I think there's a few sections later where you play as Carlos. So no choice on this one. Obviously, Jill, we know her from the first game, former member of STARS, and previously worked as part of Delta Force, which I think was some sort of secret government agency. She is of Japanese and French descent, which I had no idea until I'd done that research, which is interesting. When she worked for this Delta Force operational group, she was pretty much a bomb disposal expert. Cool. That's one of her main fortes in the field. She's also, as we know from Resident Evil 1, equipped with sick lockpicking skills. So whether that will be carried forward in this game, I'm not too sure. And at least from the point of view of Resident Evil 1, she had a much bigger inventory than Chris Redfield in that game. So seemingly bigger pockets. Must have some decent cargo pants on. In the original game, she was actually modelled, bit of trivia here for you Barcadians, on I think an actress called Julia Voth. And you can type that in. Maybe we'll flash up a bit of cosplay, because there's a great picture where she's actually dressed up as Jill Valentine. Cool. But in this new remake, she's been modelled on Russian actress Sasha Zotova, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And again, we'll flash up a picture now. Both very beautiful women. But the key thing with Resident Evil games, and I think for the most part they're female characters, there's always been a big push to not to essentially sexually objectify their characters. Now, with some of the costumes unlockable in games, that's kind of wavered a bit here and there. But certainly Jill has always been presented as this strong character, very independent, just as accomplished as the male heroes in the game and in the series. And yeah, I think you've got to respect Resident Evil for doing that, really, especially when it was first released. And perhaps those sorts of representations weren't so prevalent at the time. Yeah, exactly. So, do you want to tell us, Rich, a little bit about Carlos before we move on to the enemies?
A little bit about Carlos. He's not a massive playable character in the game, so there's not loads of information on him. But essentially, as Tabs mentioned earlier, he's a merc and he's a heavy weapons and vehicle technician. Sorry, he's a heavy weapons specialist and a vehicle technician. So that basically means that if you're playing as Carlos, you're going to have basically more powerful weapons generally, because he's a bit more beefy, so to speak. Carlos was sent in with a company of about 120 people to the heart of the disaster zone, and he was told that his objective was rescuing any survivors. However, with everything that was going on, in the heat of battle, Carlos was forced to fight for his own life, and with the few other people we've mentioned, survival alone almost.
Yeah, it all went a bit Last of Us, I think. The extent of the T-virus outbreak was just too much for even 120 men to handle. We'll come on to it, but there's some pretty hellish monstrosities to contend with in this dystopian raccoon city. And
that's a great segue into what enemies you will find throughout the game. Now, this is not a list of all enemies within the game. This is probably a list of most enemy types that you will find throughout the game, and a little bit about each one. So where do we start? Obviously, we're going to start with zombies. They're the most common enemy type. They're the most common enemy type within the game, and they are essentially humans that are infected with the T-virus. They're relatively easy to kill because of the fact they're quite slow. They don't take too many shots, especially if you can get a few headshots off on them. If ammunition is tight, you can actually just move past them, and especially with a new mechanic they've brought to the game, it seems like that will be even more in this game, which we'll come on to shortly. The only time that you're really going to struggle when you've got zombies is where there are large numbers of them and they literally overpower you, which is at that point that you probably want to be running away.
Yeah, I think if you get crowded by zombies, they're grabbing hold of you. It's very difficult to break free of those animations, and they're just going to be chipping away at your health, aren't they? So keep them at arm's length.
Then zombie dogs, or what the ones I like to call jump scares, because as we well know with Resident Evils, these tend to jump out through windows and scare the bejesus out of you. Very fast, can be jump at you, very hard to get shots off against them. We actually, when we were playing Resident Evil Remake last year, had an area where basically we had very little ammunition, and we went through the door and there's 3 dogs, and we basically had to keep replaying this section so we could get past these dogs, and it was crazy. But they're relatively easy to kill. It's just getting shots off them are very difficult, so that makes them annoying, basically.
Later on in the game, you get an automatic, don't you, of some kind? Is it like an Uzi? That certainly felt a bit better dealing
you can
with them.
Spray shot, basically, can't you? So you're going to get them with at least some shots. Moving on to some of the more larger enemies, we've got Drain Deimos. These are blood-sucking monsters that latch onto the player with its claws. They're hard to deal with, especially if it manages to latch onto you, and can cause excessive damage and kill you very quickly, apparently. The best form of defense on these is just to take them down with a shotgun, basically. I don't think they survive too well with that. So that's good. And then Brain Sucker. What a lovely name that is. And these are basically the big brothers of the former mentioned. And as the name suggests, rather than trying to suck your blood, they're going to try and suck your brain out, which is really nice. They're much harder to kill. They're like the big brothers, so they're much more difficult to kill. And, it's sort of grenade launcher territory to try and keep these at bay.
I love how the younger brother has this fancy Drain Deimos kind of name that's almost got a bit of poeticism to it, and then the big brother's just called a brain sucker.
Just all
that's
in.
it.
Yeah,
it's just what it does.
So then Gravedigger, and I believe these are one of the enemies that they've changed for the new game. They've actually changed. I don't actually know. Maybe it's not these.
I think it is, mate. Well, certainly in an article we read, it suggested they had been changed, but I don't know to what extent, to be honest. So, BArcadians, if you want to drop us a comment,
I don't know this. So I thought this was one of the enemies that they changed, but now I'm reading this, it doesn't seem like that. But basically, in the original game, the Gravedigger was basically a giant worm that lived underground, and it would basically burrow up out of the ground where you were and sort of knock you off your feet and cause you damage, and actually could kill you very quickly if it did that. There were some ways to get around it. You could hear in the sound when it was going to erupt out of the ground, so as soon as you heard the sound you could take some steps back and avoid its attack, basically. But yeah, very, very difficult to kill, basically, because it's moving up and up.
As we know in this game, Rich, we've also got this kind of dodge strafe skill, haven't we now? So that's certainly going to be crucial, I think, with the reappearance of
Absolutely. And then basically during the game, it seems like you have to tackle this twice. You tackle it once and you just sort of fend it off, and then you tackle it again to actually kill it later on in the game. So, giant spiders. And as the name suggests, these are basically just giant spiders. They've basically been exposed to the T-virus, which is what makes them giant. They're venomous, and hence they're capable of poisoning the character. And unfortunately, because of the nature of them, they're spiders. They can walk on the ceilings and the walls. So don't be surprised if one drops down from the ceiling right in front of you. And
another good monster capable of some serious jump scares, much like the zombie dogs.
And then we're on to a couple of the more end game enemies now. So Hunter Beta, one of the most powerful enemies in the game, except obviously what we'll come on to shortly. Extremely dangerous, can jump significant distances towards the player. One of the few enemies that actually have sort of multiple attack types. They're able to do a leg swipe, which just takes you off your feet basically and inflicts damage. But they're also able to do like a jump and slash, which I read as well. If they do that in close quarters, that can actually decapitate you which is like an instant kill. So you do
Wow.
have to really keep these ones at bay. They're very difficult to kill, and powerful weapons are absolutely a must on these ones. And then we've got Hunter Gamma, and these are in essence a water-borne version of the Hunter Beta. So these will appear in sort of water areas, and they're.
And worth noting, Rich, I think they've had a significant redesign.
Yes,
haven't they,
no,
in
I think this
new
is
game?
one of the enemies that they definitely have redesigned. They almost look like an enemy from Monster Hunter, which I'll flash up on screen now. They look very similar. So yeah, that's interesting. And then these, although they're weaker, they can actually jump further, which makes them a little harder to kill. But actually, they're a lot easier to kill in terms of how much sort of lead you've got to put into them to kill them off, sort of thing. So that brings us on to what is the biggest enemy that you'll face within Resident Evil, and Tabs can take us away with Nemesis.
So yeah, the Big Daddy, your absolute main threat in the game throughout the game is the Nemesis monstrosity. So just to start us off with a bit of background, well, the word Nemesis actually means, or at least this is taken from one definition, the inescapable agent of someone's or something's downfall. And that very nicely describes what the Nemesis becomes to Jill throughout the game, and to anybody else he crosses, really. So just so you know, the design for the Nemesis was actually originally a rejected design from the Tyrant 002, which is actually Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. So interesting that it was a rejected design. And essentially, Nemesis is building on the kind of foreboding figure that was Mr. X in Resident Evil 2. This kind of stalker character that is absolutely overwhelming, near enough impenetrable, and serves really just as an intense stressor while you try and maneuver through the game. Except that Nemesis is essentially badder, smarter, faster, stronger, all these things.
Great.
He's actually, though, comparably, if you look across all of the Tyrant models in the franchise, is smaller than some of the Tyrant models. But the key thing is he possesses much more superior motor skills and intelligence, much more agile. He's capable of strategizing, of more tactical maneuvering than just charging at you and trying to snap you in half. He was created again as a biological weapon by Umbrella, so he's the result of infecting a T-103 model Tyrant with what's known as the Nemesis parasite, which is essentially designed to increase its intelligence. And not entirely dissimilar from The Last of Us, another series we're doing some videos on BArcadians. The parasite takes control of the Tyrant's nervous system, essentially. So it's using that body as a host, taking control of it, and in the process it forms its own brain within that host, which then allows it to actually think and gives it that greater level of intelligence. As we know, and as you've probably seen in concept art, that the Nemesis itself is associated very much with a weapon, and that is the rocket launcher, which is, I think, generally mounted on his left arm. Not only has he got insane offensive capabilities, but his defensive and regenerative capabilities are also very, very impressive. So yeah, you can down, very similarly to Mr. X, you can down the Nemesis if you unload enough, as Rich said earlier, lead into this creature. But he will just be down temporarily. And what that will often cause is additional mutations, which usually present in the form of augmentations to his capabilities. So he might grow some new tentacles, or form a new attack on the basis of that mutation. And essentially, he just becomes worse and worse and worse as you do more damage.
Well, I believe, doesn't his form change slightly throughout the game? So every time you meet him, you damage him, but he sort of mutates into a slightly different Nemesis.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen that, in the series with even the Tyrant, as you as you fight them more and more, you do more damage, they tend to get worse and worse. That's part of what kind of the T virus is, isn't it? It's constant mutations, and the monster becomes more and more hideous. And yeah, again, there's that theme here with Nemesis. So we won't go into too much detail in terms of what happens with Nemesis over the course of the game, but suffice to say, you know, it's your task as Jill is to defeat him. And yeah, we'll let you find out what that looks like and how that plays out when the remake appears.
Absolutely.
So I thought it might be nice, Rich, just to finish off talking about Nemesis with a few pieces of concept art that we can just briefly talk through.
Like it.
So I think you can see them on your side, my friend.
And we'll put them on full screen so you guys can see what we're talking about.
And if we flash up the first piece, which I'm pretty sure is an original piece of concept art from the original game of the Nemesis. So what do you see, Rich? What's cool about it?
It's almost a familiar shape of, you know, just almost like a zombie, but it's just like enhanced, looks massive feet, massive arms, massive shoulders, and then you get to the head and it's like, oh, that's where all of the damage from the T virus seems to have been done, but massive overarching big figure.
He's jacked, isn't he? He's absolutely jacked. Broad shoulders. You know, interestingly, he's got this kind of almost combat outfit on, you would say. Almost looks like armour. Doesn't look ripped up like a zombie's would. It looks quite, you know, looks fitted and customised specifically for him. But I think Capcom did leave parts of him exposed. And if you see on his eye there, he's got this kind of stitching as a suggestion to the fact that he is a biological weapon in prototype form. He's not the finished article. And then moving on, we've got this second picture, which will flash up now. What are we seeing here,
So
Rich?
we're seeing, like, I would say this is a good shot of how powerful he is. He's literally holding, what character is that he's holding, Tabs? Yeah,
Brad
so
Vickers.
he's literally holding him as if he's nothing to him. He can just rag him about, you know, and just kill him at a whim, basically. And it just really shows the power of the Nemesis, I think. And they've slightly moved on, you know, his face and stuff. You really get more of a sense of, you know, what they're going for here now.
Yeah, I mean, he's looking at us in this kind of dead-eyed, horrendous way with that kind of mouth without any lips on it. It's quite menacing, really, isn't it?
It's almost like he's looking at us as if to say, "Don't even try anything, because look what I can do." Yeah,
you're next.
You know, it's that,
yeah. And as we know,
it's that sort of menacing look that he's got, like, "Don't mess with me, because you're next," sort of thing.
And what accompanies that in the series is he tends to kind of mumble and droningly shout the name of his prey that he's stalking at the time. So in the original, at least, it was very often stars,
nice.
as in stars, as in these, you know, he was hunting people.
I have to say, that's
stars.
one thing that the Capcom and Resident Evil sort of developers do really well, is they very well do graphics and sound to give you the atmosphere. And I think that's really well done. Like, they use sounds in certain points to, you know, to reflect safety or danger. I think they do that well. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, when you get into a safe room and you got that lovely little kind of piano tune playing out, it's an instant relaxer, absolutely, isn't it? But also in this game, when you hear stars, you know that the Nemesis is coming for you, and it's just a matter of time before you have to choose to fight or flight. And then finally, the last piece of concept art. Well, this is obviously from the remake, and it's interesting to see that there are some slight differences there.
Absolutely, I think they've taken their original concept here and almost made it seem more real in some respects. Like, it seems like it looks almost more realistic. Like, it's not taken over as much of his body, and he's got these, you know, like appendages that have been put on that are obviously mechanical rather than organic. And I think they've sort of taken the original concept of Nemesis and sort of given it a basis in more reality, in terms of, you know, that he's got these mechanical things. That's how he has the rocket launcher and stuff. And actually...
And at least there, they've toned down the kind of parasitic tentacles that are present. And I'm sure we will see them. But I would say here he looks more humanoid.
Yes.
He's got this kind of stretched skin on him, which is much more, you know, human in colour. Whereas in the original, it was this kind of rotting, you know, almost grey, greeny this looks more. He looks more humanoid, and he's got this little nose protrusion as well
Yeah.
that we see in this one, as opposed to the other one. It was pretty much hacked off his.
And actually, it's like his skin around his sort of mouth has slipped underneath his chin, which sort of, in some ways, makes it look so much more menacing.
He looks mean, doesn't he, with those bared teeth?
Absolutely. So let us know what you think about those concept art guys. Certainly, I think it's moved along really well, and actually, it looks like this remake is going to be really, really good. So I'm excited for that. But on that, what are we likely to see as sort of like new things to the Resident Evil as part of the remake? Well, I've put together a little list, and I'm sure this isn't the only things. This is what I've seen from the trailers and in-depth talks we've seen from people, including the makers of Resident Evil themselves. So what are we going to see? So obviously we're going to see a massive graphics overhaul, much like we did with Resident Evil 2 Remake, and the graphics have really come on here. They look outstanding, but they've not just updated the graphics, they've also made them seem more realistic. That they've much more lush and vibrant colours around some of the settings in the city, sort of how they would appear in real life, where you've got like neon lights outside of shops and stuff. And actually, they've sort of brought it a little bit more into the modern day. So the cable car has been replaced with the subway, which is more like how it would be, in this day and age. So that's really good. Did you want to jump in on any of this, Tabs? No?
No. I mean, just to say, yeah, it's obviously building on the foundation of Resident Evil 2, and how beautiful. I think it seemed to have a real nice contrast as well, didn't it? The kind of the HDR. Seemed very effective for me on it, and the kind of flames bursting through the darkness were, all that stuff just brings it to life more three-dimensionally and makes it much more of a visceral experience because of that, and 10 times scarier.
I mean, I think the increase in graphic fidelity has actually made it more scary because it's more realistic. As simple as that. And obviously they can work a bit more with lighting and sound and shadows and stuff like that. So it makes the whole thing more scary. And actually, something we found very much with Resident Evil 2, it's a lot more graphic because of that.
And I think it gives them more, kind of rope to play with some of the scares, with some of the, the horror elements in it, because they've got, 10 times more shades, tones, colours on the palette to do that with. They've got more subtlety by virtue of the tool set now and how sophisticated it is, whereas back in the day, they were struggling to push those polygons around in any way you would describe as subtle. So often that meant some more heavy-handed, devices to scare the bejesus out of you.
So, moving on. So, character actions have been improved, and there's actually a new dodge mechanic which allows the player to finally dodge attacks. And actually, if they counter it perfectly, there is a counter attack, which means you can basically instant kill certain enemies with the counter, which is really nice to see, because it always felt in Resident Evils like there was an animation for when you are attacked by, say, a zombie, and you're just in that animation. There's no way of getting out of it, getting away from it. So I really like that one. But it does sound like that's going to take some practice to master that. But I'm sure there'll be loads of enemy encounters, which will mean we can do that. What else? Nemesis has obviously been enhanced significantly. He's now a little bit more intelligent in the way that he comes at you, using multiple techniques, the tentacles, the rocket launcher. He tries to knock you off your feet. And unfortunately, much like Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 Remake, he's just going to hound you continuously until you go to the next story beat. One unfortunate scenario that they've introduced into the new Resident Evil is that all save rooms won't be safe. So you've played Resident Evil, I'm sure lots of you before. You go into a save room and that's a safe place. You can maybe put the controller down, make a cup of tea, sort out your inventory, save the game. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore. Nemesis will be able to break into certain save rooms and cause havoc and devastation in there, more than likely.
There was some confusion on that, wasn't there, Rich? Because we thought it was every save room, but essentially they're saying you can save the game in other areas, and it doesn't automatically mean that the Nemesis can't access those areas.
So it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, that basically you go into a save room. If the save room music plays, then that's a safe save room. If you go into a save room and that doesn't play, then if the Nemesis is chasing you, at some point he will break into that room. That's what I'm hearing.
Cool.
Which I guess adds a nice dynamic, but I like the sort of downtime of that. And actually, something I have read that so you'd be forgiven from seeing all of the trailers, that this is basically an action game now, that it's gone full action. But from what I'm reading, actually, it's still got lots of the survival horror game. So you're not just in an action sequence all of the time. So I was really reassured by that, because I was worried that was going to how this game was going from everything we'd seen up to now.
That's good to know.
What are we saying? Drain Deimos?
Drain Deimos
have been enhanced, and they're now able to insert a parasite into Jill's stomach, and it basically does this by jumping on top of you and feeding a tentacle down into your stomach and releasing the parasite, which apparently looks horrendous on the animation. And the only way to sort this is to take a herb down, and that causes Jill to vomit the parasite up, which I thought is actually a really interesting thing to have added to the game. The hunter.
Yeah, I wonder if that would be a unique death if you just let it.
Yeah, maybe you just become a zombie. I don't know. The hunter gamers have also been redesigned, and they're actually now capable of instant kills when they're close by to the player. And probably one of my most exciting things that they've added to this game is fast pickup. So we'll all know what it's like. You're running from an enemy. And it's all hell's breaking loose, and you see an item and you want to pick that up, and this speeding through this area has suddenly been into, oh, here's a herb, into the inventory, put it into the inventory, out again, and then you're straight back into it. Well, to try and keep those motions flowing, provided you've previously picked, say, a herb up, so you don't need to see what item that is, you don't need it explained, you'll be able to fast pick up, so you'll be able to pick the item up while running past it, I guess provided you've got inventory space. And I just think that is a fantastic little quality of life feature that they've added to the game, which will make it feel much more immersive.
Absolutely spot on, and hopefully, BArcadians, by the time you watch this video, you'll all have played the demo launching Thursday the 19th of March, which will give us some more content to delve into on the next video.
Absolutely. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed what we've done there. Just a little talk through of the Resident Evil 3 remake and what's to come.
Please drop us a like to say to tell us that you like the video and to help support and grow the channel. Drop us a comment to let us know your thoughts, what you'd like to see upcoming in this series we're going to be continuing with as we build to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis Remake. And yeah, BArcadians, thank you very much for following the channel and supporting us. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and ring that bell for notifications. And I think that's about it, Rich. Another one for the archives.
Stamped and completed.